I'm Dave Laird.
I'm Matt Booker.
And I'm Rob Short. You're in trouble. You're in luck. It's the Great Concavity.
I love that.
Yes! I love that part of Infinite Jest. You're in luck is like one of my favorite gags in the whole novel. So that's a solid opener, Rob. Thank you for that.
I agonized.
Our guest today is Michael Pemulus.
The Peemster himself. A savage off the lob.
P.S. Wolf spiders ruleth the land.
Awesome, Rob. Well, welcome, man. You are on episode 13 of The Great Concavity. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So, Rob, you are a Wallace scholar from Gainesville, Florida. Tell us a little bit about your sort of academic background, what you do with Wallace.
Academic background. I am a sixth year PhD, which really mathematically shouldn't be possible. They shouldn't still be letting me do this, but I promised him that I'm going to wrap up here in December.
Nice.
But yeah, the dissertation is basically I'm looking at the difference between how theory works in his first novel and David Foster Wallace's second novel. I'm using a recovery studies frame because it has this sort of built-in three-part structure, it's a sort of like addict thing, like the way we were, what happened, and what we're like now. And so I'm doing Broom of the System, the internovel period, and then Infinite Jest, sort of mapping it onto that trajectory.
Awesome. So, Rob, we've talked about you on the podcast before. You and Matt are currently doing a writing project on simpleranger.net, sort of like along a similar timeline as Infinite Winter, would you guys say?
Yeah. More or less.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
And you guys are looking quite a bit at the concept of addiction and the AA portions of the book particularly. So that kind of coincides with what you're writing in your dissertation?
Yeah.
Cool.
I forgot to add in that I'm sort of casting him as a recovering theory addict.
Sweet.
And so that it kind of dovetails with the personal addiction.
Yeah. Like as in literary theory, recovering from?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a cool way to think of it. Because there's the whole stuff about him being like young and show-offy in Broom of the System, like displaying his kind of theory weeniness.
The chops are on display in Broom.
And then he comes to sort of regret that a little bit and change his tune going into Jest.
Yeah, he slags that first novel all over the place.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and this reminds me that it was something Rob and I sort of bonded over last year was about this very subject. And when Wallace, I think, changes between those two novels, he gives an interview to Speak magazine.
Yeah.
And in that Speak magazine interview, Rob and I both had trouble tracking it down, but we eventually tracked it down and got, the original text of it posted up. And I found that to be just really a fascinating interview, sort of lesser known interview where he just comes out and says, at the time he really was trying to show off this technical chops about, his knowledge of theory and analytical philosophy. And then he realized that's not why people read novels.
Right.
Yeah.
So he chucked that.
Yeah, he says something like, the first go-round, I got rid of the emotion for the technique, and now, I know people read for different reasons, and I would get rid of the technique to save the emotion.
Right.
I love that line.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that's cool.
I love that I had to get my copy of that out of the old editor Dan Roleri's mother's basement in California and get him to send it to me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a defunct magazine.
Rigorous.
Right? It's a defunct magazine.
Oh, yeah. Well, good job sleuthing that, Rob.
He was super gracious about it, so if by chance he's listening, thank you very much.
That's cool. So Matt and Rob, how long have you guys known each other for?
Well, I think
Go
just
back a few years.
Couple of years at the Wallace conferences. I mean, I was really impressed whenever I got to see Rob's paper last year at the Wallace conference, and we had met up and talked at the 2014 conference. But the one last year, if I'm not correct,
but my paper that year was garbage.
No, it was not. It was not garbage. It was not garbage. But I honestly don't even remember what it was, so how could I say it's garbage?
No, I'm just kidding.
What was your 2014 paper on, Rob?
That
It was.
focused, hey?
It's funny because like I've sort of managed to riff on the same thing. What if they take my my proposal this year? Will be 3 years in a row. But I sort of pitched it. No, last year was the novel of ideas one, which I figured out on the back end. I got really embarrassed about because the title of my paper, David Foster Wallace and the Postmodern Novel of Ideas, which I ended up not wanting to use. But in the meantime, like after I submitted it, I found out that Adam Kelly has a published article with the exact same name, and I was mortified when I found out. But let me see if I can pull this up. I'll get back to you on the first paper.
No, that's fine. I remember though that we had talked about a lot of other things, and really the idea for the project we're doing now really stems from some conversations that you and I had about Wallace's ideas about recovery and the way that they're represented in Infinite Jest. And really, I was sort of reading him through the lens of stuff he wrote after that. And Rob can tell you that we got really hung up on the idea of worshiping, and that in the famous speech, "This is water," what's now called "This is water." I used to just call it the Kenyon commencement speech, but he says, everyone worships. And to me, this was really key, because if everyone worships, then there is no such thing as atheism. And to me, he's conflating two different things there, but he's also like using this AA idea, right? That if there's no such thing as atheism, then everyone has a higher power, right? Everyone worships.
Even if it's Satan.
Even if it's Satan, I mean, that's to.
I think there's somebody in Infinite Jest that does pick Satan.
Yeah. What's the guy's name? Is it Keith or is it no? Let me dig. It's one of my favorite parts.
It's not Randy Lentz, is it?
No, it's not Randy Lentz. I wish.
Okay, actually, all right. While you're digging that up, I did find the first one. It was called "After the Theory Wars: Rehabilitating the Human in Wallace's Infinite Jest."
Right.
And it was basically about like my beef with theory, like post-structuralism, and I saw the sort of similar thing in Wallace. Not that he's beefing with them, but he sees parts as more useful than others. And it was sort of about a personal history and a reader's history of encountering him and the commonalities there.
And what I like about, what I was really drawn to with your academic writing is that it was very clear that you were not only trying to make like an academic point, but trying to, communicate to people in the room, which, it's true, but like,
No, that's a huge compliment.
no, I'm dead serious. But like, if you've never been to an academic conference before, you might be surprised to hear that people will often just stand up and read a bunch of jargon that is
Staring at the lectern.
yeah, and they're just completely oblivious to the whole room. And to me, that's like very off-putting, and I find it very jarring. And it's very shocking that they're actually not even looking up, at the rest of the room.
Right.
And your work, in a textual sense, I think does that, and that it looks up at what's going on around you, and uses the language of everyday life to try to communicate. So that's one reason why I was really drawn to your paper.
Well, that's a really kind thing for you to say. Thank you. Because it was a struggle for me to sort of get out of that mode of writing, because I would go back and read stuff I'd written, and I thought, Jesus, who would want to read this? Even if you were interested in the subject matter, it's so buried in terminology that I want to look impressive or try to speak the language of that sort of discourse community. But it was like, if I'm going to do any justice to this material with Wallace that sort of derailed my whole academic career to studying him, I have to write in a way that people would want to read it, because if the whole point is to communicate it and to get it in front of as many eyes as possible, you kind of have to do that.
Well, and it seems like a lot of academics don't have that luxury, and that they have to prove themselves first by saying, oh, I can write this amount of jargon and this amount of, showing that I'm actually smarter than you. I can write something that no one can understand.
Yeah,
and that's sort of the mark of like, oh, you must be a genius then. And
showing that you can rap.
And, more established writers, whether they're academics or not, sort of, they don't have to bother with that. And they can, they have the luxury of just writing what they, that's maybe a more straightforward style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Unless you're, Derrida.
Which, like, I can't understand Derrida for the life of me at all.
Well, that's by design.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. But when people are super into him, I'm just like, man, I don't know. Like, he's purposefully being obtuse, and I don't know if that's something that I dig.
He's playing. Actually, you got to be careful. You're going to alienate sections of the listenership.
Oh, yeah, I know. I mean, I dig some Derrida for sure, but you know what I mean? Like, some of it's just like, oh, man, you're just killing me here.
It just feels... I don't know. My major beef is that it just feels irresponsible. Like, he did eventually come around to offering some ways forward and some solutions rather than just saying the history of the West from Plato to yesterday is fucked and I want to tear it down.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. You may have to bleep that. Sorry.
No, we can put the E on. It's fine.
Okay.
Speaking of the F word, it's Glenn K, the guy who's personally chosen high power Satan. Glenn K, not
that's
Keith.
Right.
I said Keith, but like Keith Freer.
That's like Glenn Kinney. I wonder if that's Glenn Kinney.
Who's Glenn Kinney?
You don't know Glenn Kinney?
I don't think so.
Glenn Kinney is Harold Hecuba in Big Red Sun, and he's a real like film critic that.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He commissioned Wallace to write some stuff for Premiere magazine, and he's wrote a pretty nasty piece trashing the end of the tour.
Oh yeah.
So, anyways, Glenn K. That's interesting. One thing I wanted to sort of, relate this back to Wallace is that he struggled with this too, and that I was trying to originally say what your first paper where you're talking about broom of the system. Wallace was very much trying to write something that was impressive, and to impress other people when you're 24, it seems more vital, Although I think Wallace did a little bit of that in 2003 with the math book. It's just basically like incomprehensible to most of us in a way.
Yeah.
To prove that he could do it in a way, I think he was really invested in showing how smart he was.
Yeah. I found the first 100 or so pages of that book manageable. Like, yeah, I can track with this, like I have a history degree and I can sort of understand some of these concepts in a context, historical context, but once he starts getting into the Cantor stuff, I was absolutely lost forever.
No.
Oh, you guys are talking about the Infinity book,
right?
Everything and more. Yeah.
Okay, I was actually thinking the fate, time, and language
thing.
That's
insane.
I was like, you hung with that for 100 pages?
I hung in with fate, time, and language. I read all of it, like even like the preamble essays, but I did not have a fun time doing it. It was basically just to read it because Wallace wrote it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a slog.
But that's something that he wrestled with, right? And I mean, to me, this issue, I just find it sort of ironic that it even comes up at the David Foster Wallace conference, right? That we should still be struggling with this choice between, do you write in a way that is nearly incomprehensible, but to try to impress people that are, at a conference, or do you write in a way that is actually trying to communicate something using more accessible language?
Right.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Speaking as I can do that now because I've done conferences and have spoken in front of people and taught classes for a while now. So being behind a podium in front of a room full of people, doesn't scare me as much as it used to.
Yeah.
But like when I was a first year MA and applying to the first conference where I gave a paper, I was mortified because I just imagined this nightmare scenario where I go and I make my argument and then you do the
tomatoes.
Q&A. Yeah, well, you do the Q&A and somebody like, I don't know, that you've written about, their work you've written about or something stands up in the back of the audience. It's like, no, son, that's not what I meant at all.
Yeah, that's a huge fear of mine too.
Yeah.
So my very first conference paper was last year, and actually, Rob, you and I met because we were on the same panel together.
That's right.
And then you and I had probably hung out with you more than almost anybody else that weekend.
We had a good
great.
time.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. So I know what you mean, like getting up in front of that crowd. Mike Miley, Dave Herring were in the audience, and I was kind of a bit nervous. Like, I could be way out to lunch here.
Matt Booker's in the audience.
Matt Booker's in the audience.
Oh,
yeah.
Please. I'm like, the least you have to worry about there.
Well, it all worked out in the end, I guess, right? So
Yeah.
I was pleasantly surprised.
So can we talk about that a little bit? Because both of you guys have taught Wallace, and like, I'm not a teacher, and I would like to sort of pick your brains a little bit about like what that's like, and
Sure.
like how you would build a syllabus. Rob, could you talk about like first time you taught Wallace? Do you remember?
The first time I taught Wallace was back in Alabama at UAB in Birmingham, and I taught, the first thing of his that I ever taught was the commencement speech.
Yeah. Cool.
And sort of, I traditionally, I think that year, the first year, I actually gave it as an assignment because I was teaching a writing class, like a freshman comp class, where you have different units like exposition, persuasion, et cetera, position paper, compare and contrast, things like that. And one of the things that they do before they start writing is they do an analysis paper. And so I gave them the text of that, and we listened to it in class, and I had them sort of do it like in a classical Greek sense, like analysis, like pulling apart of what he's saying, and like have them outline, basically write an outline of the argument, and identify his thesis and his support and evidence and stuff like that.
Yeah. Cool. And then you've gone on and you've taught an entire course on Wallace, right?
I did. My students told me that it should have been subtitled 1,000 Different Kinds of Sad.
That's like what we talked about last time with Dave Herring, like that question, all of this stuff in Infinite Jest is so sad. Is there any positivity, in his work?
Yeah, I actually got a concordance app and loaded up Infinite Jest into it and searched for the word joy. So it's to see if it was joy, like Joy, to see if it was in there. And it comes up, I think, 12 times. Yeah. And sad comes up 94 times.
Oh, yeah.
So I could see how they would be left with that impression. Yeah. But I totally agree with what Matt said last week, which is, like, when is the subject of literature, I'm botching the quote, but ever been happiness?
Right. Yeah.
It just doesn't make for a very good book.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Unless you're like Somerset Maugham, I think, maybe. Like The Razor's Edge has some really joyful self-discovery parts in it.
So other than the sadness thing, tell us a bit about the course, how it went, student response.
It was like easily the best course that I ever taught. Just on, my measure is how engaged do the students get. And I had... Our discussion spilled over every single day. It was only a 50-minute class. It met 3 times a week. And we were always getting kicked out by the next class. Like,
sure.
We need the room now. And they would kind of bow up on them like we were really in the middle of something. They would be like, just a minute, hang on. But we eventually had to make a Google group so that the discussion could sort of spill over into that. And that's part of why I'm in my 6th year, is because I lost every bit of my writing time to that class.
Yeah.
Because they just couldn't stop talking about the material. And, I don't think it was any sort of magic that I was doing. I wasn't responsible for it. It was the material that I put in front of them. And I knew when I was making the syllabus, it was sort of like a gallery of what will they let me get away with teaching to freshmen. Because, like, I had them read all brief interviews.
Right. Yeah.
And...
like in terms of content here, like censorship kind of stuff? Do you mean?
Yeah. Well, I was afraid that they, I've taught Bukowski and stuff, but that's a little more canonical if you can even say that about him. But with Wallace, it was...
What?
It was... Well, other people have taught it at UF. Like, I don't think anybody had ever taught Wallace here at UF. And so... Yeah, but it was they were so engaged. I had a kid who 2 weeks into the class at the end of drop ad came to me and he said, I really want to keep taking this class. I actually don't even really go to my other classes much. I just come to this one. But my advisor told me that I already have a credit for the slot that this fills in my degree program. Is it okay if I just come and sit in the back and sort of audit your class? Yeah.
Yeah. And did he? Did he follow through on that?
He did. He didn't. Cool. He didn't show up like I was checking a box by his name at the beginning of class, but he was there most of the time, and he really kept the discussion going on the Google group long after the actual term was over.
Oh, that's amazing. How many students did you have in that class?
It was at the cap. It was 18.
18. Rad.
Wallace was taught. I took a class in the fall of 1997 where the teacher was a writer. But it was a literature course, and for the textbook, she used this Norton anthology called Postmodern American Fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It had just come out. And I thought it was such a cool looking book because it had like a UFO on the cover of it.
Right.
And I remember she taught us. My teacher was named Beth Nugent, who, if you've never read her books, like she has 2 books, go get them. They're amazing. But she taught Linden. And I was just like,
wow.
It was a weird selection to be at one in that book, and like with the rest of the course, the other stuff was pretty gritty and like really contemporary. And Linden, it was just like I was just like, meh, I could take it or leave it, whatever. I don't know who this Wallace guy is, like, the Infinite Jest guy wrote this, I was like, I didn't even really make the connection that it was like, even in the same wheelhouse, it felt so different.
Yeah.
But there were people even, this is going back 20 years, almost 20 years now that were teaching Wallace. But I think there's a lot different of teaching him really after 2008.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I say that as neither a teacher or a student, but really as a reader, Yeah.
I still get my syllabus for that course is like I have one of those academia.edu accounts.
Yeah.
And the syllabus that I uploaded to that is far and away the most I get the most hits from Google and stuff for that.
Oh yeah. Did you see Josh Royland's syllabus for the current course he's teaching on Wallace?
I have not.
He posted it, I think, was it on Twitter maybe a couple months ago? Yeah, I'll send it your way. But yeah, I can imagine that being like such a fun project, just even sitting down to write up, okay, what is the stuff that we're going to do from Wallace's entire body of work, I imagine that's pretty daunting.
Choice.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, it was a nice experience going to the university bookstore and looking for my course, like on the little dot matrix printout label that they have, and then underneath it seeing all this Wallace.
So good. That's awesome.
I remember as an undergrad student of just going through those aisles and just buying stuff from other classes just because I liked it.
Yeah.
I would be like, oh, Bukowski, I'll buy that.
Yeah.
Right.
Or, they get to read Wind Up Bird Chronicle in that class?
Yeah,
like, what?
I'll buy that.
I'll buy that.
I would buy it even though it's like not even a sign. I'm not taking the class.
Yeah, totally.
Sort of reevaluate your class choices based on the bookstore.
Yeah.
No, it just goes to show that I've always been bad at following directions. And that I was like, nah, I don't want to read that. It's like, we're assigned to that. We have to read it. I was like, I don't want to read. I'm going to read what I want to read.
Right. I had let's see, I had 3 texts of Wallace's that I had him buy. It was Brief Interviews, Consider the Lobster, and then we read all of the Pale King at the end of the class. Yeah. And then I had him buy Boswell's Understanding David Foster Wallace, and that collection that Byrne edited, the Conversations with David Foster. It had just come out then.
Yeah, cool. So what were some of the big hits from the students' perspective? What were some of the pieces that really resonated with them, or sections of the course that were particularly, grabbing?
Man, I remember Big Red Sun was an event.
Yeah, I bet.
I'm looking at the syllabus, and that August 27th was Big Red Sun, drop ad ends, and they had a handout that I gave them called Postmodernism in a Nutshell. Ha ha. That was a rough day.
Like a scrotum, you mean?
And if you like. Let's see. I remember the last brief interview. The day that we did that was a hell of a day. It was actually the first day that I ever heard the phrase "trigger warning."
Oh yeah, I bet. Interesting.
Yeah, and there were a couple of students who, I'm not breaking any FERPA laws if I don't say anything other than a couple of students, but I had a couple of students in that class who would email me and say, like the night before class, like I've just read this material and it's really messed me up, and and I don't know if I'm going to be able to come in tomorrow, and if I'm there, please don't call on me because it's like I don't want to talk about this.
Right.
So, and I'd never had anything like that happen before, and I would try to get in their face with some of the stuff, especially at the beginning of class, just to sort of provoke them into a response, you know.
Yeah.
And because I try to give them stuff that I like to read. I don't like to teach stuff that I don't like to read. And
totally.
This class I really got to turn that up to 11.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else was good?
Did you guys do any portions of Infinite Jest in that class?
We did not.
Okay.
There just wasn't time.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the pinch for sure.
Yeah, we closed. The only other thing that we did was we closed with the "This Is Water" benediction playing. It was like the last day of class. Wish you may way more than luck kind of thing.
Oh yeah. Matt, do you know if is Josh Roiland doing Infinite Jest, the entire book, with that class? I think he is.
I think he is,
Yeah.
and I think that we will have them on a future episode, and we're going to talk to his class actually because they have been fully immersed in Wallace
Holy
since
Moses.
January.
Yeah.
January, I think, and that his kids are like really super smart, undergrads, so they're just really reading Wallace.
Yeah, isn't that so impressive? They're fitting Infinite Jest and like a huge amount of other Wallace stuff into. It's bewildering.
I can't imagine doing anything other than.
I know, right?
I mean, is a semester longer than Infinite Winter, or?
Yeah, I
guess
guess. Semester's like what, 3 months?
Yeah.
4 including exam period or so?
4 or so.
And Infinite Winter's like 3 months ish, so. Yeah.
Okay, well that's doable.
But they're doing tons of other stuff as well as Infinite Jest. It's pretty bonkers.
I mean, the first course that I ever heard of that was solely about Wallace's work was Kathleen Fitzpatrick taught a course. And she had written something on her blog, Planned Obsolescence. She had written about teaching his work while he was down the hall in Pomona. While they were both in Pomona, and they sort of had this understanding of like, yeah, you kind of know what I'm doing, but should I even ask you to come and speak to the class even once? Not really. He didn't really want to acknowledge it was professional, courtesy, but I really don't think that he wrote any of his stuff with like academia in mind.
Oh, there's no way.
Like I think his assumed readership was much, much broader. And so I think for him, it was hard for him to reckon with because on one hand, he was a university professor. And he very much taught other people's work. And on the other hand, he was a writer producing work that he knew was being taught in university courses.
And I don't even think he thinks about the audience until after Broome. I think there's a letter to Franson where he says, it was in the Max bio that I don't have any regard for the reader at all. That it's his choice to read my stuff and expend his energy on it, and then that completely changes by the time he gets around 1989, 1990.
I don't know how you write and not think of the audience, though. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a puzzle.
I guess if you're just writing to show off, you do some set pieces and some high wire. He called it verbal stunt pilotry. He's like, you got a punch list. I got to make sure I hit these sort of meta conventions and forms, and get the laugh in here, and nod to Derrida, nod to Wittgenstein. Dum, I'm done.
What's interesting though is he starts sending out the work pretty quickly. Like even as an undergrad, he wanted it published, and he published Planet Trilithon as a short story. While he was an undergrad, he published several things as an undergrad. So it's not like he was just writing for, I'm going to show my best friend and maybe my best friend will laugh. It's like, no, he was sending it out for the whole campus pretty much right off the bat. So
Yeah.
I think it's complicated, that audience in mind, and like he did want an agent, he did want a bigger audience, but yet academics, love him in a way as much as any other contemporary author in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
I guess he would have been writing for an MFA seminar workshop audience at times during that period.
For sure, for sure. I think that's a good point.
So he's writing to impress classmates, and he's also writing to impress whoever's teaching that seminar, if he likes them anyway.
For sure. Can we get back to your writing a little bit? And you mentioned your dissertation. Is it 2 parts or 3 parts? Can you remind us of how it's structured again?
It's basically 3 parts. There's an intro and an afterword, but it's basically 3 chapters, and it's on Broome. The first chapter is on Broome, and then the middle section is on the sort of inner-novel period, and it kind of focuses on his essay, The Empty Plenum, about Markson's novel Wittgenstein's Mistress as a central text, and then the third part is about Infinite Jest.
Cool.
And you had written about Markson a bit last year at the conference as well, is that correct?
That's right.
And did you come to Markson through Wallace?
I did.
Yeah.
I came to Markson through that essay, actually. But then when I picked that novel up, I could not put it down.
Oh, good. Cool. I've never read it, and I've always wanted to, so I should. That's good incentive.
I've probably sent out 4 copies of that novel to people. It's just seriously, like in the mail, like you have to read this.
That's right.
I'm obsessed with it, and I'm really obsessed with the last 4 books that Markson wrote. Starting with Reader's Block and ending with the last novel. I mean, those to me are, some of the greatest like achievements of our time, and are still, I think, underappreciated.
Oh, definitely.
And Wallace sort of reviewed. There's a lot of correspondence between Markson and Wallace in the Ransom Center, and I think Wallace, even though he really appreciated Wittgenstein's Mistress, I don't think he really got what Markson was doing later.
In what way? Like you'd be educating me, because I have the only other thing that I've cracked is this is not a novel, and I haven't finished it yet.
How can you not finish that, Rob?
Talk to my dissertation director.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I was gonna say.
No, it's a very short book, and it's very like elliptical style, and it's got a couple of lines per page, like 10 lines per page.
Oh, I can see it from where I'm sitting. Believe me, it's at the top of the pile.
Well, Markson has 3 others like that. I mean, it's same style. And my friend Evan Lavender Smith, who is a writer, and he wrote a book in the same style. He referred to those books as porn for English majors.
Oh yeah, definitely. Just that aphoristic
addictive
style with the and the game of making the connections.
Yeah, I mean, it's just very addictive. It's hard for me to stop. Once I get going on those, it's like page after page after page.
And it's just so oddly moving. You look at it on the page and you think, how could this possibly engage me the way a long-form narrative could when it's so choppy in like 1-sentence paragraphs? And then he'll out of nowhere just hit you in the gut.
It's very complicated, too, because he's doing a lot of different things there. There's one thing he does is there's a long list of other famous writers who are anti-Semites.
Oh, wow.
And there's another one that's a long list of writers who didn't become famous until their 40s or 50s or 60s.
Isn't there a list of fictional suicides?
Oh, yeah.
And
real suicides.
And Cadenza's in that, right?
Oh,
right, and that's in Reader's Block.
Okay.
And Wallace advised him to cut that.
Oh, really?
He was like, I really don't like that. I don't think it works. It's not, he had some reason for it. And Markson just sort of politely nodded his head and kept it in.
Like Wallace would have to peach on a lot of
right.
occasions.
Just like, okay, thanks for your opinion. I'm leaving it in.
Yeah, no, it's amazing stuff, and I really think the essay, and this is sort of what I pitched in my my proposal for the conference this year, is that the more stuff I look at in this internovel period of Wallace's that's critical work, right, like literary criticism. Yeah. And even things like book reviews, you can read his complaints and the things that he praises in what he reviews or what he's talking about in a piece of critical, like in a critical essay, as sort of like punch lists for him to do in terms of the things that he praises about the novel, and then if he has complaints about it, they're things that he's like, never ever again will I do this. And I guess the biggest example of that I could give is in the Markson essay, where he complains that when Markson writes about Kate's backstory about losing the child and the husband, that was really for him like the only part that didn't work in the whole novel was this sort of pat explanation, or even with Markson, it's not even an overt explanation; it's just sort of a suggestion that's dropped in there in the stream of consciousness. But he said, I don't find that works, because if that explanation doesn't ring true with the reader as a reason for the character acting the way that they're acting, then that character fails for the reader. So he said, you've already succeeded in her voice and in her story and in her situation, narratively and formally. You didn't need to do that, Markson. Like it was better without it. And I think that's sort of why you get the lacuna that you get in Infinite Jest, the parts that aren't there. You don't get the epiphanies for Hal and for Gately, like you don't where they start their recovery. Mm-hmm. You get, because it's sort of like if he gave the explanation for what it was that finally, they hit rock bottom, and this was the thing they saw. They had this epiphanic sort of like varieties of religious experience, William James-esque, AA testimonial-esque, seeing the light when they're down and out and hitting bottom, and that's the beginning of their road to recovery. Well, if that didn't ring true for the reader, then the reader it's off-putting, right? Because you're like, I don't understand your motivation. That wouldn't have motivated me. But by absenting those from the narrative, I think he makes it more universal, because you kind of have to fill in. You're faced with the evidence that it did work and that Gately is staying clean. And so, like, whatever it was sufficient, and it's up to the reader to sort of fill that in, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair, but I think Wallace gives that advice to Markson, who later takes it, because after Wittgenstein's Mistress, he writes this book, Reader's Block, which also has a sort of Kate-like character in it, and it doesn't work as well as the other sort of aphoristic style, so he ditches that character altogether, and really the only character becomes really David Markson. The
worst vice is advice, right?
Yeah, that's been said. It's been said. But I gotta say, your description of your dissertation is totally strange to me, because I thought it was something completely different.
That's just the middle section, where I'm talking about
what?
Sort of like the wait, which part are you talking about?
I thought you were writing about like recovery and addiction, and about the community in Wallace L.
Yeah, that's the afterword is all Wallace L.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
And the intro is, and it's like, it's not just like tacked on. It's not getting short shrift. It's like 20 plus pages. The sort of history of Wallace L, beginning back on the pension L list. Like I actually used their search function and found the post where it suggested that if you guys love Wallace so much, why don't you make your own list?
The vegan anarchists or whatever they were.
Yeah,
that's pretty much it. In Minneapolis and California,
right.
And so I think, could you explain a little bit more about this?
Well,
how that fits in, or
the recovery angle. All right, so I cast Wallace as a sort of recovering theory addict. So he goes from a reliance, and I'm pulling part of this from the Max bio and some of it from the primary text. But in the Max bio, he talks about Wallace's reliance on theory, and like when somebody said in one of his creative writing seminars when he was at Arizona that who reads Derrida, or I don't need to read Derrida, that like everybody in the room thought there was going to be a fight, that that theory at that stage in the game where he's writing Broom, for Wallace is sort of like the badge of serious fiction.
Yeah.
And what separates serious fiction from just, middle of the road type stuff, not fully engaged, not fully aware of the history of American letters and its place within it. And but the way that Max casts that that use of theory, that insistence on theory in the early stuff, is that Wallace wasn't comfortable yet as a writer, and so he sort of relies on these outside authorities, these theorists and philosophers, to imbue his fiction with a sort of gravitas that he doesn't feel like he's able to give it himself. And then by the time you get to Infinite Jest, he's very picky about what he does and doesn't use and how he uses it. Like, there's this thing in philosophy that's the mention-use distinction, and Wallace mentions this in the Markson essay. It's the difference between the opening sentence, right? In the beginning, I sometimes left messages in the street, Matt.
Right, that's correct.
And then, so like the messages in that sentence, it's a mention of the message, and then the novel itself is like the last sentence is somebody is riding on this beach, and so the first instance is a mention, and the second one is a use of those messages. So it's a difference in engagement, right, between like basically name dropping a theorist and then narrativizing in your fiction the consequences of living in a world that's governed by that theory or that philosophy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's something he struggled with a lot. And I'm sure you talk about this in Broom of the System versus Infinite Jest. Like, how do who do you think is the governing theorist of Infinite Jest?
If I have to choose one, I'd say it's William James. It's pragmatism. It's a sort of, he uses William James as a filter for anything else that comes in. Like he says in that Larry McCaffrey interview, that the guy says, well, how do you justify using these sort of metafictional techniques that you deride others for using? And Wallace says, well, the way that I decide if theory or an idea or a philosophy goes into my fiction is it has to do something beyond just showing itself as there, beyond the mention of it, beyond a name drop. Like, it has to have a function for the narrative.
Right.
And so if he can use this sort of theory or technique to engage it with the narrative and sort of weave it into the form and make the form sort of feed it through the theory as a function, and it comes out the other side representative of that theory, like, living in a world that's, Wittgenstein's Tractatus or something. What would it be like to live in that world would be an example of what he thought about Markson that succeeded, right? That was a good use of theory. Whereas, when he beats you over the head with the whole meaning is use speech, where he says meaning is use over and over again, this Wittgenstein maxim in Broom of the System, he looks back on that as a mention and not as a use of it, right?
I mean, that's surprising to me, because I agree with you in a way that William James plays, really integral role. Like, he cites him directly in Infinite Jest. Mm-hmm. But to me, whatever sort of overarching philosophy is over that part of, or at least 1/3 of the book, is really Bill W.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but where Bill W. gets a lot of his ideas is James.
Well, I mean, do you think that? You think Bill W. read William James?
It's in the big book.
So tell us more about that. That's what I'm trying to get us to, is to the big book.
So,
right. So you and I have been talking
Bill
about that.
Bill W. is the guy who wrote the big book of AA. Is that right?
That is, well, it's technically credited to
for those of us who are
Alcoholics
totally
Anonymous
familiar.
World
Right.
Services, but yeah. there's a big section that's him. It's
Okay,
basically divided into two sections. There's a sort of the doctrine and the steps and introducing AA, and then the other half is like a bunch of testimonials that are sort of like short stories.
Right.
Let's see here. Man, you're going to call me out on this. I'm going to have to figure out where James
No, it's fine.
No.
I think it's interesting that,
Here it is. I got it.
Wallace only cites a few even proper names in Infinite Jest and William James' Varieties of Religious Experience
Right.
is one of them.
Yeah,
in the context of
Frege-
Randy Lenz.
Right. Yeah, the cocaine stash. That's just a master stroke.
Yeah,
that
totally.
originally was a medical textbook in the original drafts. And he switches it to the large print edition or whatever of this fictional edition that doesn't even really exist. But because they're published as two separate things. But this is Matt. This is on page 567, and it doesn't matter what edition of this you have. They always keep the pagination the same, so that if you're in a meeting, that it doesn't matter if you have a library copy or you bought one from them. But it's Appendix 2, and it's spiritual experience. Let's see. The terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. And then skipping down, he says, among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time, and he goes on. But
yeah, that's interesting. I didn't recall him actually citing James, but I do remember being taken aback that, in the big book, there's very little hesitancy to just straight up say, like, no, it's a religious experience.
yeah,
And
and I think it's James's, like, the religious experience that he's talking about in Varieties of Religious Experience that they're referring to there. I'm trying to pull this other index up. One of my co-director, Trish Travis, wrote a book that's the history of, the subtitle is A Cultural History of the Recovery Movement from Alcoholics Anonymous to Oprah Winfrey. And it's called Language of the Heart. And I'm just trying to look up James in here because I know this is where I got some more connections between Bill W. and James. Yeah, here we go. Go ahead. Talk amongst yourselves, and I'll come back.
Well, what I wanted to talk about was like what interests me there is how, if AA is pretty simplistic, like how could Wallace be, convinced to join it? And as a writer and as a person who is incredibly smart, how does he say, like, okay, actually this is me? And I think a lot of it is something you and I had talked about before, Rob, which is the sort of rhetoric that goes on within AA's language is like super sophisticated, and
there are careful rhetoricians, especially that chapter that's addressed to agnostics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that appeals to him, that they, put a lot of time and effort into thinking out all of these objections to why you would say, I don't believe in a higher power. To them, they say, okay, well, that's the key issue, and so we're going to devote a lot of time and energy into showing you why you need to sort of just accept that what we've said is true.
Is it all like experiential in that book, in that context, or do they bring in like the classical arguments for the existence of God? Or like that?
They do both.
Okay, so the cosmological argument.
Well, it's actually they sort of they have a unique spin on it. Have you read this part, Matt?
We agnostics?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
They do. There is the experiential part is the testimonial section, right? That's the stories of all these people who have hit bottom and had an experience, and that was spiritual in nature, and then recovered. And but they actually advance kind of a complex, nuanced. It's not complex, but it is nuanced argument in just a sort of just straight reason as their only ally. And they say they had a tough time. They start off, because they're good rhetoricians. They sort of appeal to you and want to identify with get you to identify with them. And they say, we were skeptical at first too. They say logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It is not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach and interpretation. Hence, we're at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it's more sane and logical to believe than not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said, we don't know. But they basically go on to say that when they looked at it, they were already living by faith, and what they had faith in was reason, and their own ability to reason and apply logic to the situation, but that they had,
but like, look where that got us.
Exactly. And so they used the situation of the alcoholic who's got it bad enough to come in, as a sort of a leg of their argument. Like, if you didn't have such a problem, then you wouldn't be reading this argument anyway.
So it's more of like a pragmatism angle, right? Like,
it's absolutely pragmatic, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's James wrote a book called Pragmatism.
Well, and what I find interesting about it is it wouldn't have survived as a movement without that. Like, it needed from the very beginning to be very pragmatic in saying, "Oh, you don't believe in God, neither do we." So
but let's just get
past that.
Yeah.
Let's just get past that then, and we'll call it a higher power, and your higher power can be, AA.
Exactly.
Which is just this thing we just invented, and let's just agree to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh man, you guys, that section where Randy Lenz is convincing, is it Clonette that his like crotch, it could be her higher power?
Oh,
do you remember that part?
God,
really
what
foul.
a snake!
Really
so
foul.
foul, man.
What
like,
a slime ball! It's like
Lenz
something Ted
just
Cruz
gets
would
worse
say.
and worse.
You can edit that out.
But what I found was, in Infinite Jest, it is pretty subtle, and that, what gets Don Gately straight is really just this working the program, right? Yeah. And that he doesn't dwell too much on the higher power thing. He just does what he's told. If you tell me to get a job, I'll get a job. You tell me to go to the halfway house, I'll go to the halfway house.
Right.
And that's sort of this routine, this unthinking routine is what saves him. But it's different in the actual AA literature, and Bill W.'s story in particular is that he is a complete alcoholic, his life is unmanageable, and he meets a friend, and the friend is like former alcoholic who's gone clean, and he's like, "How did you do it?" And the guy just straight up says, like, "I've got religion."
Yeah. Comes to visit him.
Comes to visit him and says, like, "I've got religion now." And it's like, really? Religion? That's it? I tried that. I don't think it would really work.
Well, and you get a little aside there, too, where he's like, "Oh, great, this is why you're here, because you're nuts."
Right. Because, like the rabidly Christian woman in AA who, like, plummets off the building and then gets swept up by the updraft and through the glass into the building and then becomes rabidly Christian from then on.
Or like the two Jehovah's Witnesses that showed up at my door today.
Oh, nice. Got a visit from that.
I did.
Old Watchtower Society.
I think it's because I told you guys that I would postpone an interview with the risen Christ to do your show.
Well, they don't actually believe in a physical resurrection of Christ, but a spiritual one. So
I have no doubt that if he exists, he sent these two.
But you know what this brings me back to is a conversation that Rob and I had previously about a thing Zadie Smith wrote after Wallace's death.
Yeah.
And she had brought up this very issue, and she said something like, I pulled it up here, she said something like, she doesn't want to replace an ironist with a God botherer.
Right.
Like the word God need not be present. She'd rather use the phrase ultimate value, or whatever name one has for it. It's what permits the few heroes in brief interviews to make their gestures on the strength of the absurd, making art that nobody wants, loving where they are not loved, giving without the hope of receiving. And really that sort of ultimate value, that's the same as saying like a higher power.
Yeah,
right?
it sounds kind of ambiguous, relativistic-ish.
And it's like, you can worship whatever then. I mean, she's buying into that very much, that, and Rob and I sort of had some disagreement over this. Like, it's very tough for me to square this with, like, whatever comes after religion. Or like, whatever is contemporary religion. Like, this is kind of it.
Well,
like, ultimate value or...
Oh, her phrase.
Higher power.
Right. I think if she had stopped with, here I am giving Zadie Smith writing advice, but if she had stopped with the word God need not be present, like, boom, you're done. Like, your point is made, and is a lot more universal, I think. But I don't know, Matt. I thought I had finally brought you around to the correct interpretation there.
I'm really stubborn.
With
the
everybody worships thing, with the with what bothered you and what bothered me initially about that.
I keep coming back to it still because, to me, it is, even if I make peace with it, it still gets to the heart very quickly of, I think, what Wallace was concerned with. And I think what he's trying to illustrate, even back, before Infinite Jest, is about this addiction is what people worship, or there's some kind of addiction we all have.
There's something in your day-to-day that you think of more than anything else, I think is the best way that I can put it.
Right.
And I buy that more than saying, oh, there's no such thing as atheism.
Right, but I think what he's saying there, because he knows this is only like a 20-minute show, is he's using everybody worships because it's like a Nietzschean aphorism, and it kind of like it sticks in there and you remember it. But what he's really saying is everybody has something that takes, whether they realize it or not, they spend more of their time than anything else like thinking about, because attention is a big thing with him.
Yeah, it is.
Obviously. And that it's this thing that sort of that while your mind is in a neutral gear, that it sort of drifts to naturally, that it's those tendencies that he's talking about as worship. At least that's the way that I square
like the
circle.
default unconsciousness, right?
Yeah, the default mode. I don't know, man. I thought I had made a convincing argument.
Have you guys tied this stuff back to Marath and altars?
The choosing is everything.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff.
I don't know that we've talked about that, have we, Matt?
No, tell us more what you mean, Dave.
Well, like we talked about this with Robin in episode 3. She quite eloquently quoted Marath's section from memory about choosing the things that we worship, and the altars choose our altars of worship carefully, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously highly resonant with the Kenyan speech and the stuff about AA that you guys have been writing about on Simple Ranger.
Yeah, I guess I'm in the point in my life where I'm surprised that this becomes such an issue, and it is. It's such an issue throughout your adult life about, the book Catholics by Brian Moore.
Yeah, that's a great book.
Which he recommended to Zadie Smith, and recommended to a lot of people.
Right, that's why I read it.
It's really about a priest who's 40 years in a monastery, and is really sort of losing his faith.
Yeah.
And there's another book I would recommend called Canticle for Leibowitz. Do either of you know this book?
No, I don't.
I know the title.
It's like a post-apocalyptic novel, like the end of the world, and the only guy left who is a priest, and sort of has to like rebuild religion over.
Oh, cool. That's interesting.
Yeah, you should check it out. But I'm surprised, like, just how frequently this comes up, because as a young adult, it's very easy to sort of leave religion behind and just say, I have nothing to do with that. I'm going to go to university. I'm going to make my own way. And I don't need any of this, right? And then to see even, and you see that in Wallace, like there's not a ton of religion in Broom of the System.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think he knows how off-putting it is.
Yeah,
and,
he talks about that quite a bit, right?
And Matt and I we've talked about this and have sort of similar backgrounds. Like, I have my grandfather's a Methodist minister, and so like I grew up in the church, and really the I hope my mother's not going to listen to this. The place that I sort of figured out that I didn't believe in God was like I was a counselor at a church camp. And,
sweet irony, huh?
Well, I was supposed to give a lesson about like why you believe, and I sat there and I stared at the page, and it was like, well, shit.
And you just felt that you didn't. Interesting.
Well, there were, I could give all of the examples I'd heard all my life, but it was sort of this thing where, like, just going through the motions. And so, yeah, my lesson that next day my worst day in the classroom. That was way worse than any of those days in the classroom. But, like, I've sort of gotten to the point where I've decided that if I care about people, that to try and disabuse them of the notion of religion or anything that they take solace in that I don't think is ultimately destructive in their personal lives, I guess, is a bit dubious for me. Like, because if what I care about is their well-being and their happiness, then why? Like, I'm not going to argue with my parents about God, you know. And
Good luck.
right. And but it's funny. My grandfather, the older he gets, the more I feel like he's interested in things like reading books about the cosmos and the universe, and like it he's starting to sort of let some of these questions sit and percolate and struggle with them in a way that he wouldn't have let himself, I think, maybe when he was we had a congregation. And
right, yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like Christianity has a pretty amazing tradition of like being able to entertain questions and doubt and all that kind of stuff.
Augustine, yeah.
Yeah, totally, yeah. But then in the kind of like a Southern evangelical like model, doesn't seem to be as much room for that kind of thing.
Oh, no, sir.
Yeah, totally.
About zero.
Yeah. So I come also from like a Christian background and still consider myself a Christian theist. I teach at a Christian school. So it's really interesting for me to hear you guys take on this AA stuff and how you approach Wallace's questions about
just to be clear, like
atheism,
I feel like numinous, like I'm capable of feeling the pull of the sublime. Like I think it's amazing that the world continues to spin and that we have not blown the whole thing up yet. Like that's amazing to me. The picture of Earth from space and then imagining everything that's happening on it is like, what's not magical about that? It's the layer of dogma on top of that kind of gets to me. And it's interesting you talk about Canadian religion, because I read a story at the Walrus today. I don't know if you're familiar with this magazine. Yeah. Canadian magazine about somebody in the church of, what's the national church up there? On the convexity side. I
don't know if you could say
Anglican?
there is.
Anglican?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of denominations, but I don't think you could say there's a national.
Well, this
church.
actually had like legislation backing its formation and stuff. But
okay, it might be. It's probably the Anglican Church of Canada or something like that. Then.
But it was an article about a minister at one of these churches.
Oh, you were talking about the United Church.
Yeah.
Who's
an avowed atheist.
Yeah, totally. And the United Church has gone on a very extreme path away from orthodoxy for sure. And that's a great example of it.
But when Matt talks about having trouble with the everybody worships thing, I want to point him to that congregation and be like, this woman is an avowed atheist, but she still she sees the value in the tradition and the community.
Right? Yeah.
And this common sort of touchstone, but they've just sort of replaced it with humanity, like this pan-humanic
general
sort of
goodwill kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think that's what they're getting at in AA. Actually, they say that the religious impulse is something that is in every person, and that you just have to sort of tap in, like you've had it all along. You just have to recognize this common capacity for feeling.
I guess I'm just surprised that it keeps coming back to this.
It's probably my fault.
No. I mean, not your fault at all. I mean, Zadie Smith brings it up, right? Like George Saunders brings it up. Like all of these other people who are observant readers, and Wallace himself brings it up. And it's in The Pale King. It's in Good People. And, his ideas there, I think, are designed to get to really big issues really quickly. And this is, obviously a huge issue that I don't think people associated with Wallace, on the evidence of infinite jest. But I think it's because it was deceived and it was wrapped in AA, and...
Well, this is interesting. You guys talked about some of the bigger philosophical influences in infinite jest, and in my thesis that I'm writing right now, I'm kind of arguing that St. Paul is a major one of these philosophical influences on the text, in the way that infinite jest deals with salvation or soteriology, the idea of people being redeemed or human recovery, basically.
Conversion stories.
Yeah, conversion narrative, that kind of thing. So, yeah, what do you guys think of like the term post-secular is talked about in Wallace studies, that America or the West is coming into a time where it's gone from this sort of like protracted atheism into a period that we could call maybe post-secular, and now a restoration of some kind of like faith or spirituality system is becoming a more prominent sort of approach to life. That's kind of interesting. I don't know if it's...
I think a lot of people identify as religious, but really just want to say that.
Yeah, I'm sure there's posturing.
Well, I mean, you ask the average person who says they're a Christian what the Ten Commandments are. I'm pretty sure like 80% of them aren't going to be able to give them to you.
Yeah, verbatim.
Well, it's just sort of basic stuff, even paraphrased. Like that's kind of the law if you're a Christian, right?
Yeah, sort of. I guess it's in the Old Testament, so it's maybe not like in the forefront, but yeah.
It's a simple list of 10. Come on, you guys. Let's not hold them to too high a standard.
Well, Zadie Smith brings it back to this, that, God is love, and, he lacks... One thing that's hard to find in Wallace's writing is a lot of basic human connection. And Franzen made a similar point in that you don't see a lot of normal, loving relationships in Wallace's work. Yeah. And, if God is love, then it's not really present there either. And, I have problems with both of those interpretations, but I think, there's something to the fact that he is not really offering much salvation, not really offering a way out. That, your students earlier said it was really sad, all this sadness. There's a lot of despair and bleakness and oblivion, and in the Pale King. Yeah. I mean, they're both pretty dark.
Well, and he said he wanted to do something sad with Infinite Jest.
Yeah.
Right, but they don't really offer a way out, and I think that readers, maybe following his trajectory, would be fair to ask for like the flip side. Okay, if this is so bleak, then how do we escape it?
Right. So my approach to this question, Matt, in my thesis is that Infinite Jest presents a spectrum of salvation. So you have a very low end of a spectrum, which is what you're talking about. And then you've got signs of hope in, say, Don Gately. And then you've got almost kind of a Christological model in Mario, almost. And that's actually what my presentation for the upcoming Wallace conference is on Mario's role in the salvation narrative of Infinite Jest.
Oh, wow. I can't wait to hear that.
So that'll be fun.
Yeah, I think that's, that type of stuff is really interesting because it's not, it's not obvious, or it's not like in your face, like you need to do this.
Exactly.
Mario's scene in the subway
overt.
was maybe, if it's not the most moving scene in it to me.
Like with Barry Loach, you mean?
Yeah. Where he reaches out and touches his hand.
Yeah, that's a big part of what I'm saying.
Like I had to stop and put it down and just shut it for a minute. Like that got to me on a deep level. Mm-hmm. And the conversations with him and Hal, he's just he's like the anti Oren, and like Hal's just kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
I'd say he's a source of hopefulness, but again, it's as an ideal character, or one that a reader's supposed to identify with ideally, it's kind of a big ask with Mario.
Yeah. He's almost like non-human in some ways, like in terms of his character, like he's guileless, right?
Yeah, he's definitely physically described like in this sort of Caliban-esque, he's described as having claws and things like that.
Brady kinetic and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, though, I think that all three of those, are Wallace. And he's had a lot of self-disgust and looked at himself as a deformed and messed up person. But if you go back and look, there's an interview with the real Pat Montesian, who was the director of
Granada House.
And she says something like Wallace was like the most kind and caring person to these addicts, right? Addicts are often like throwaway people.
Right.
And that society looks down on them and says, you have ruined your life, you've lost your job, your house, your kids, you really don't deserve anything. And Wallace, as a person, at the time he's writing this book or thinking about writing this book, is the one who is reaching out and touching them and helping them get to their meetings and get to their appointments and, caring about them when no one else did. And to me, that's like, that's Barry Loach. That is the Christ-like thing.
Right. I kind of see the writing of Infinite Jest as maybe, and this, if I'm pressed on this, I may not be able to come up with like a 1, 2, 3 sort of evidence list, but I feel like writing Infinite Jest for Wallace was working the steps.
Yeah.
And was and like, all right, so this thing you were just talking about, Matt, with him driving people to appointments and things like that, that, you know, there's a part, and they kind of bury it in the big book, where they say that getting clean and getting sober is really only a means to an end, that's not the ultimate goal of Alcoholics Anonymous. Have you read that part?
Right. Yeah, right. Well, and in fact, I touched on this a little bit on Simple Ranger.
That's making me look terrible because I did read it. In the sentimentality one?
Well, maybe it's one that I haven't published, so I'll let you off the hook there. But say
that's a rare occasion, Matt Booker letting someone off the hook.
No, but you're right. And let's say that you know, once you're clean, it's really about serving others.
It's about
servitude.
Well, the word they use is use, right. Useful. And I think that for a guy who had finished that first big novel, and felt like a prodigy, and felt like it was impressive, and like the big like theoretical underpinning thing, like, or at least one of the two, was meaning as use, and understanding this concept of use as socially determined, like it is in the later Wittgenstein. He gets to AA and, you know, is in a low place personally, and they're telling him, you know, yeah, getting sober is a good idea, but in the end, what we want from you is for you to be of use. That I'm sure that had some resonance, you know, with as much time as he had spent thinking about use. And I know he's thinking about it in the Markson essay, because he does a whole footnote about the mention versus use distinction, which is, he credits a German guy, Frege, with whose name actually comes up in Infinite Jest. So
he was a mentor of Hegel, Frege.
Yeah, and so it's like, I know this whole use thing is, I see it everywhere now that I've started looking, and I don't know, it's just there are things that when I came across them in the big book, when I was reading through that I thought, okay, I can see this, like I can see his ears pricking up at this part, you know.
Yeah, no, I think the whole idea appealed to him greatly, and there's a part in Infinite Jest, like, if you do a search on the word coffee, and he's talking about refilling the coffee urns,
right.
And you're sitting there in a meeting, and you're thinking, like, what am I even doing here? I'm just putting out these folding chairs and scraping this nasty coffee grounds out. But by doing that, you're sort of facilitating, and you're being useful by providing this space for other people who might walk in off the street, literally their first day of sobriety. So I think that appealed to him greatly, as like, I can't do much, but I can, you know, I can make this shitty coffee and put out these folding chairs and sit around and have the bright lights on, and we can talk for an hour.
This is my contribution, right? Yeah.
Right,
and I think it also ties into the stuff that they hit the early AAs with, which is just the importance of rote discipline and of routine. Like Gately talks about hitting the knees every AM and PM and thanking the God that he doesn't believe in, you know, for one more day. And the whole one day at a time is just, it's another routinized sort of regimen that they stick to. And the coffee's part of that, and the use is part of that. But I think, you know, you're talking about opportunities for salvation, Matt. Are we shown any way forward? You know, I know he's on record all over the place in interviews saying things like, it's not enough to just present a picture of how bad everything is, right? That you can't, like, diagnosing does not lead to the cure. And
the prognosis.
Yeah, and so you've got to offer a way forward. It's not enough, you know, you got to apply CPR to the parts of us that are still human. And I think the thing that I kept coming back to when you were like, where's the hope, where's the way forward, is there is one thing that's shown that works in AA, and it works paradoxically, almost inexplicably for the characters, and I think for Wallace too. And that's just AA. It's just the doing it, the ugly, the sacrificing in myriad petty unsexy ways every day that he comes back to in the speech, is the rote, the grunt work, the unthanked work. Like this comes up in the Pale King with "you're called to account," you know, and heroes.
God.
Yeah, I love that scene.
Yeah, so good, so funny.
So I don't know. I think it's not pretty, and it's not a Hollywood sort of like, and they lived happily ever after, and then everything was fine. Like he doesn't want. I think the last thing that he would have wanted to do with pointing a way forward or applying CPR to the parts that are human is fill your head full of nonsense or stuff that he didn't really believe. And he's like, yeah, you can make it work, but it's ugly and it's hard, and you're not going to want to do it. But the routine does work, or at least it worked for me. Does that make any sense, Matt, or am I just talking gibberish?
No. It's I'm just digesting it because it makes a ton of sense, and I would love to talk to you about it for like 2 more hours.
I'm sorry, I have talked way too much in this conversation.
Not at all,
way,
but
man. Great.
I do want to get your final thoughts on some of the subjects we talked about, and if there's anything we haven't talked about, like throw it out there now, and we can talk about it in a future time.
I don't know. There was a section. I downloaded a video from that Italian thing, the Conversazioni. You guys know what I'm talking about? Where Wallace was at the
Conversazioni.
Yeah, where I think you don't hear the question. It's sort of like brief interviews, but you don't he's giving an answer to a question and he's looking straight into the camera, and the question is something like, where do you about postmodernism or realism or something like that, and Wallace is asked to sort of describe his own writing or sort of situate himself, and he said, I like to think that I'm one of a group of writers who are writing now who try to use the sort of postmodern lineage that they sort of inherited, and all the meta stuff and all the theory and all the intersection with continental philosophy and analytic philosophy to get at some basic human verities. And I think that his whole point with the theory stuff and saying that no writer writing now can afford to regard theory as divorced from his own concerns, no matter how stratospheric, is his way of sort of like Pound's Make It New, where he's like, the emotions don't change. Human emotions don't change. The people have felt the same basic love and hate and jealousy and fear, back to the Stone Age. But what you have to do with literature, your job is to make it resonate with your reader, and the way that you do that is that you present a world that is recognizable as their own, right? And people talk all the time, I know I've said it more than once, about the experience of reading Wallace as the voice in your head.
Yeah.
Right.
Albeit a more compassionate and better educated and bigger vocabulary. But I think the theoretical stuff and the obsession with postmodernism for him is his way into making it new, to making it resonate with the community that he knows, and that's an academic community of privileged white people. Right. But you write what you know. And so I think his later stuff, his stuff after Broom, is his attempts to connect with the reader. He can't let go of the theory, that he's theory addicted, that he struggles with that the whole time, because that's his way in. That's his way to make it relevant as literature that you'll be interested in reading as a serious reader. And but to also use that to say, I'm not letting any of this theory in or any of this philosophy in, just for its own sake. It has to be able to do something.
Has to have use.
Yeah, it has to resonate with the reader. Get rid of the technique to save the emotion kind of thing.
Yep.
Spot on.
That's
man.
awesome. So people can find what you guys have been writing about this stuff at simpleranger.net.
Yes, sir.
And
Right.
you guys are posting, what's the timeline? Weekly? Once a week?
Movies sporadically.
Erratically. Cool.
Yeah, ever since I told my director about the address, if she sees something show up there and I'm late on a deadline, it is my ass. So.
Oh man, I have the same thing with Infinite Winter with these posts, and I could just, if my supervisors knew about it, they would just be like, "Dude, where is your thesis?"
I might send her a link to this podcast after I graduate.
Yep. At least we're close, right, Rob? We're getting close. It's almost done.
Well, thank you guys for having me on, man.
Thank you so much for coming on. It was great talking to you.
And I'm sorry for monopolizing the conversation.
Hey, well,
not at all.
But I mean, like, that's what we want. We bring guests on so that we can hear other people talk about Wallace. So that's right on, man.
Well, I'm just leery of my wife's advice before it. Last thing she said to me was, "Don't talk the whole time." Just like, don't do like you do with me when you talk about Wallace. Don't just sit and sermonize. Just have a conversation. Don't be a maniac.
Oh man, that's awesome. So Rob, where can people find more of your stuff online? You're on Twitter. Where are your things?
Man, I have the worst Twitter handle in the world.
Hey, what does that mean?
It's Latin.
Yeah,
it's Latin, right?
I got so sick of Trump when I finally decided to join Twitter. Like Nick was saying, he held out, right. That when I finally went to join, like, I'd had a couple of drinks and I was trying to like pick a unique handle, and just it was like nope. And I was like, okay, fine. I will write "my strength is in my work" in Latin.
Vis me in labore, is that it?
Yeah. And see if anybody's taken that. How's that, smart guy? And it was like, taken. And I was like, ha! And then the next day I was like, that was the dumbest thing I could have ever done.
Well, at least you don't have a 2 after your name like my Twitter handle does.
Dude, 2 would be so much easier to remember.
I guess.
So if you just search, go to one of you guys that has a recognizable and easily typable, and just look for my name is the easiest way to find me. There you go.
Cool. And you're on academia.eu as well. Check out Rob there. Awesome. Great. Rob, thanks again, man. It's great talking to you.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Look forward to seeing you hopefully at the Wallace Conference
I enjoyed
this
it,
year.
Rob. Good conversation.
Matt, cool. We're gonna miss you this year, man. And
yeah.
You let me know if I can just come, like, if I can call in a bomb threat to whatever it is you guys do that day.
Yeah,
to your family reunion or whatever.
Don't do that, but just come to Austin at any point. Anyone who's a listener, like, I will be offended if you don't come to Austin.
And he's serious.
Some point.
Yeah.
And if you don't call me. And in fact, I want to give a shout out to a listener, Matthew Alexander. I had drinks with him the other night in Austin, and he's here doing research at the Ransom Center from the University of Liverpool.
Awesome.
So, boom, Matthew Alexander.
Very cool. Same goes for me if you're ever in like Kelowna, BC, which would be never. But yeah, I know there's a couple listeners in Vancouver that it'd be fun to hang out with. So
yeah,
one of these days. Cool. Matt, where can people find our things?
We're at Concavity Show on Twitter and Instagram. Yep. And we're concavityshow@gmail.com.
That's right? You got it, man. Nailed it.
So if you want to email us, I still have some bookmarks. If you want a Pale King bookmark, just hit us up on Gmail.
Yes.
And I'll send those out.
Awesome. Yeah, we love hearing from you guys. We love messing around on Twitter and Instagram. Keep the feedback coming. It's a blast.
Yeah. This is the highlight of my bi-weekly period. So you guys keep on keeping on.
Oh, thanks, Rob. You're sweet, man. All right. Mamacita, take from me what I stole. Oh, I get a look from you that slips me to a blank page in my soul, like the left open window.
Ah, man. This is the part that you're going to need to edit out where I sort of make noises with my mouth.
No problem.